Hello everybody. Today we're continuing our devotion messages on the life of David, and this time it's the big one. If somebody out there only knows one thing about the life of David in the Bible, it's probably that he killed Goliath. And the world has remembered that battle in this way. The underdog took down the heavy favorite. The little boy beat the huge giant. 5 smooth stones and a slingshot destroyed a guy that had so much armor, the armor alone probably weighed more than David did. And when they think about David versus Goliath, they think about some kind of amazing victory against all odds, like Appalachian State, that tiny school, defeats the University of Michigan in football. David beat Goliath. But that's actually not at all what this is about. Yeah, David, a boy, beat Goliath, and yeah, it was against all odds, but the main point of the day was that the Lord's name was at stake, and the Lord's name gained glory in the end. I think you'll see what I mean as we go through the scriptures for today. If you'd like, read the entire chapter of 1 Samuel chapter 17 sometime. So the Israelites are fighting the Philistines, and a Philistine champion from the city of Gath named Goliath, this huge man with all this armor, came out and every single day shouted defiantly, "I dare someone, anyone from Israel to come and fight me one-on-one. We'll make the rule that whoever wins the battle, the other country will become slaves of the winner. Come on!" And he made fun of Israel. He made fun of their God every single day. This happened every single day. All of the Israelites, led by King Saul, quivered in fear and ran and hid and refused to even think about fighting this giant. David came from home to bring his brothers, who were part of the army, some food, and he heard Goliath shouting his usual defiance and looked around in shock. Isn't anybody going to stand up to this guy who keeps defying the name of the Lord? He was shocked that no one cared about God's reputation. And in the end said, "I'll fight him." And so King Saul had David try on his armor. It was too big. He said, "I don't need that. I don't want it." And then David marched out to face this giant. And all he had was 5 smooth stones that he had brought with him from the stream. Goliath had a spear. Goliath had armor. Goliath had a helmet. Goliath even had a shield bearer. And he looked at David and despised him even more. How dare these people send me out, this kid, to fight me? The tension was high. David was confident, not because himself really at all, but because he knew that the Lord's name was at stake and that the Lord was on his side, and one man plus the Lord is greater than any giant or even any army. David, when he stood out one-on-one to face Goliath in the battle, said this. 1 Samuel chapter 17, beginning at verse 45. David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Goliath marched forward to take David down, so he thought, and David reached into his pocket. He pulled out a stone, maybe a baseball-sized, smooth stone, put it into his slingshot, and hurled that thing at Goliath. I did some research and realized that someone who was skilled in this back then could have hurled that stone at least 60 miles an hour and maybe as much as 75, 80, or even 100. That's what the estimates were. It sunk right into Goliath's head and knocked him over, just like that. David ran over, took the giant's own sword, and cut off his head with it. And David had killed Goliath And the best part about the whole day, of course, has nothing to do with David or Goliath, with the underdog or the favorite. It's that people who are paying attention would know there is a God on the side of the Israelites, and one man plus God is greater than any giant. I think that's really important to hold close to our hearts, because we don't really face any giants on a battlefield full of armor shouting reckless words at us, but we do face all kinds of giants metaphorically in our lives. Are you tempted by the giant of being worldly and greedy and wanting more and more money and power? Stare that giant down and honor God's name today instead. Are you overwhelmed by a to-do list that just never seems to stop? Stare that giant down and have this one focus for today. Honor God's name today. Are you disappointed because plan A failed and plan B doesn't seem much more promising and you don't even have a plan C? Stare that giant down and honor God today, trusting Him and His timing above all. Are you reeling from a loss? Stare that giant down and grieve as you collapse into God's loving, powerful, precious promises. The one thing to really take to heart and remember when you think about David and Goliath is this: God's name is at stake, and it is essential to honor Him today. Even if no one else is, even if you're being personally attacked, even if you're staring at a terrible, nasty giant of a problem, honor God's name today, because one person plus God is far more powerful than any giant.